Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you have never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe and don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. This week we are going to be talking about the solved case of Oscar Velazquez. He was a young man from Chicago who in the summer of the year 2000 was tragically found murdered. Once a homicide investigation was launched by Chicago PD, their inquiries led them to uncover two suspects. And in all honesty, it was hard for them and everyone to believe that these two people were responsible for committing this horrific crime. However, the evidence seemed to indicate that they were. But just quickly before we get into the case, I would like to say a huge thank you to Clockmaker for kindly sponsoring this section of the video. Now, if you love to play detective and enjoy trying to solve a mystery, then you need to join the 30 million plus people around the world that are currently playing Clockmaker. It's a free mobile game set in a little Victorian town called Clarksville, a town full of mystical mysteries and very dark secrets. As a result of the actions of the sneaky and insidious Clockmaker, the residents of Clarksville have found themselves in a cycle of temporary anomalies, illusions, and dangerous traps. And it's down to you to unfold the tangled web of incredible events. In Clockmaker, you have to discover a compelling story, unravel the city's dark secrets, and defeat the villain by solving match-free puzzles. There are more than 100,500 levels to complete, and the confrontation with the Watchmaker is very challenging intellectually. However, fear not. If you feel that you need a break from the puzzles and the riddles, the friendly townspeople can help you relax with fun fairs and holidays. You can travel to different parts of the city. You can help to fix and renovate the area. The game has so much to offer. I've been playing Clockmaker for weeks now. It's quickly become one of my absolute favorite mobile games. The match 3 puzzles are so much fun to play. The visuals and the decoration of the game is just beautiful. And what I love is that even if your internet fails, you can keep playing it, which is just perfect for me because the Wi-Fi in my house is notoriously unreliable. Clockmaker is just an incredible game. As I said, it's challenging and also stimulating, but at the same time, it's relaxing. My favorite time to play is in the evening when I've finished work and I'm just trying to wind down. So if you would like to start your adventure in Clockmaker, then be sure to click the link in the description box or the pinned comment to download the game for free. And if you go through my link, you will receive 10 free crystals. You're welcome. Again, a huge thank you to Clockmaker for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. Thank you to you guys for always supporting the sponsors on this channel. And now let's just get into the case. So for this week's case, we are going back more than 22 years to the year 2000 in the city of Chicago, which is of course located in the state of Illinois in the US. It was late in the evening on the 6th of June 2000, around 11 p.m, when a member of the public picked up the phone and contacted emergency services after discovering a fire in an alley in an area on the south side of Chicago. It seems that initially this person just thought that that's exactly what this was, just a smallish fire that firefighters would just need to come and put out. However, after getting off the phone, they quickly realized that this situation was a lot more sinister and serious than they first thought. When they got closer, they realized that the thing actually on fire was a body, a dead human body. So they immediately rang 911 again and told the operator about their realization. So emergency services went straight to the scene, and sure enough, the person that made this call was right. This was a body on fire. Although granted, initially it was hard to tell. At first it looked as though it may have been like a rolled up carpet in the flames. However, it was actually a human body that had been wrapped in some tarpaulin and also a duvet or a bed sheet that had this floral design on it. So firefighters distinguished the flames, and unfortunately this body was pretty badly burned. They were able to tell that this person was a male, but sadly authorities couldn't find anything at the scene that could tell them his name, like an ID or a bank card or anything like that. So for now, he was a John Doe. Near the body, the police did actually find a few items that they thought could have possibly been used to actually set this man's body on fire. They discovered empty cans of like cleaning products, I think, aerosol cans, and there was also an empty bottle of nail varnish remover. So those items were collected as potential evidence, and alongside this, the police were also speaking to people that they saw at the scene, people nearby. They conducted door-to-door inquiries. They took statements from everyone who lived in the area where the body was found, just asking if they had seen or heard anything. Perhaps they saw the person or people that set this body on fire, but unfortunately no one really seemed to have any information. Obviously this did happen quite late at night when I imagine most people were just in their bed sleeping. A post-mortem was carried out on the deceased male just the day following the discovery of his body on the 7th of June, and it was determined by the coroner that this man had died as the result of foul play. Someone had murdered him. However, he had not died in the fire. He wasn't alive when the fire was set. He was actually killed before that, and the way that he was killed was he had been shot with a gun in the back of the head just once. The bullet was actually still in his head when he was found. It was a .380 caliber bullet, and there was a little bit of blood on the floral bed sheet that he was wrapped in where his head would have been. But there didn't appear to be much blood at all in the alleyway where he was found, which indicated to the police that that wasn't the place where he was killed. It seemed as though this victim was shot and murdered elsewhere, and then his body was wrapped up in the bedsheet and the tarpaulin, and then he was taken to the alleyway and set on fire. Whoever had done this was clearly trying to cover up what they had done. They were hoping that the victim would probably just burn to nothing and that no one would ever find out what they did. Unfortunately, as I said a minute ago, there was nothing at the scene or on this victim that could have identified him, so the police were struggling to work out who he was. All they knew about him was that he was, of course, male, and it was also determined that he was Hispanic, but finding out his name was obviously #1 priority in the beginning of the investigation, because hopefully when they find out who he is, they'll be able to determine who did this to him. So in an attempt to discover the victim's identity, detectives began looking into all of the men in the city that had recently been reported as missing. Do any of them match the description of the victim? But sadly, this line of inquiry turned up nothing. However, then just 2 days after the man's body was found, there was a breakthrough when a woman got in touch with the authorities saying that her son was missing and he hadn't been seen by anyone for a good few days. So this woman and a few of her loved ones went to the morgue to see if the murder victim in this case was her son, and sadly it was. Her son was Oscar Velazquez, and he was just 22 years old at the time of his death. So just for a bit of background information on him, Oscar Velazquez was born on the 20th of November 1977. His mother was named Maria, and I unfortunately couldn't find the name of his father anywhere, but they were originally from Mexico. Oscar lived in Mexico for most of his life. He went to school there. However, I think it was in his adulthood or his late teens when the family moved to the south side of Chicago. I think Oscar had 2 siblings in total. He may have had more, but I only found the names of 2 online. He had a sister named Jacqueline and also a brother named Marcos, but I believe he also had quite a few cousins as well. Oscar came from quite a big family. One of his cousins, Rocio, actually said in a documentary that I watched that Oscar always set the perfect example for the younger children in his family. As I understand it, he was one of the oldest cousins and the older sibling, I think, and his younger family members always looked up to him. He was always there for everyone, and he tried to encourage them to do the right thing and take the correct steps in life. Oscar was also described as being incredibly kind and caring. He was honest, he had a very good heart, and his sister Jacqueline said that Oscar was so much more than just a brother to her. He was also kind of like a father figure for her and also an amazing friend. They were really close. Oscar was close with with everyone in his family, and they all just loved him so much. When Oscar and the family moved to Chicago, he eventually started working as a truck driver, and by all accounts this job was going really well for him. He was earning good money from doing it, which was really important for him because he always wanted to be able to help his family and support them financially, and now he could do that. He was incredibly determined and hardworking. On the whole, Oscar Velazquez just seemed like a nice, kind, normal young man. So it was such a devastating shock to his family when in the summer of 2000 they learned that he had been horrifically murdered. They just could not understand why. Why would someone want to do this to Oscar? After taking statements from Oscar's family, detectives learned that he had disappeared just 2 days before he was identified on the 6th of June 2000, the same day that his body was found. So he had also been killed that day. He must have been shot and killed shortly after he went missing. On the evening of the 6th of June 2000, Oscar had made plans to meet his uncle at the gym. They were going to go to the gym together, and they had arranged to meet there at around 7:30 p.m. However, when his uncle got there was no sign of Oscar, so he got in touch with him, and Oscar said that unfortunately he had to cancel. He wasn't going to make it to their gym session because he had other plans. Something had suddenly come up that he needed to do. But it turns out that that was the last time anyone ever heard from Oscar Velazquez. Following this, he disappeared. He never returned home, and he didn't get in contact with any of his family members to let them know where he was and when he would be back, which they said was just so unusual for him. It was not in his character at all to do something like that, to not keep in touch with his loved ones. So they did start to get really concerned, and as we know, just 2 days after he was last heard from on the 8th of June, his family got in contact with authorities, and Oscar was identified as being the man that had been murdered and set on fire in that alleyway. So now that Oscar had been identified, the police began coming up with potential theories as to what might have happened here. Who could have done this? Could this murder have perhaps been gang related or something? Because there were a lot of gangs around the area where he was from. Was Oscar maybe involved in the wrong crowd? He was in a gang and this gang killed him for some reason. However, that theory was pretty quickly ruled out. The police soon learned that Oscar wasn't a part of anything like that. He'd never been in a gang. He'd never been involved in any criminal activity of any kind. So another theory was this a robbery? Was Oscar killed by someone or someones who were trying to steal something from him? And this theory did seem very possible because there were a few possessions of his that seemed to go missing following his murder. Firstly, his wallet was missing, and also some jewelry of his. Oscar's mother Maria said that her son always had this silver chain necklace around his neck. He was always wearing it. But when Oscar's body was found, the chain was gone. In addition to that, his car was also missing. Oscar had a white Camaro Z28 car, which he had only purchased fairly recently, I think, but after his murder, it was just gone. It was nowhere to be seen. Although, having said that, Oscar's brother Marcos did tell the police that the day after Oscar was last seen on the 7th of June, he thought that he did see the car. Marcos said that he saw it just driving along the road, but oddly, it wasn't his brother driving it. In this car, he saw 2 young women, or 2 young girls, 2 girls that he didn't recognize. So now the police had one of their first big leads in the case. They needed to find out who were these 2 girls that Marcos saw driving Oscar's car, and could they have had anything to do with his murder, or did they have any information about the murder that would prove useful to the police? So immediately the search began to try and track down Oscar's Camaro car, and it wasn't long before they found it. The car was found abandoned, I believe just a couple of miles away from where Oscar's body was discovered, and just like Oscar's body, the car had also been set on fire. By the time it was found, I think the fire had gone out, but the vehicle was just destroyed. The inside was completely destroyed. It was all burnt out. So once again, this killer was trying to cover up the crime. They were trying to destroy any potential evidence, which suggested that the car must have been involved in the murder somehow. Maybe that's where Oscar was killed. He was shot inside his own car, meaning that there would have been blood all over the seats and stuff. So maybe that's why the perpetrator set the car on fire, to get rid of that evidence. Or perhaps Oscar was killed elsewhere and the car was just used to drive his body to that alleyway where it was later found. Unfortunately, because the car was so badly burned, detectives were unable to recover any evidence from it. But the question of who were those two girls seen driving it remained. Were they the people that abandoned Oscar's car and set it on fire? Now, as part of the investigation, the detectives had obtained Oscar Velazquez's phone records and they were going through them to just see who he had spoken to on the day/night that he was killed, the 6th of June. And they discovered that around 7 p.m. that night, he had had a phone call with a young woman called Regina Defrancisco, who was 17 years old. His phone records actually showed that he had been speaking to Regina and texting her quite a lot in the month before his murder. It turns out that they were actually dating, Oscar and Regina. They had been seeing each other for about a month or so. So let me just tell you a little bit more about her and her background. So Regina Defrancisco was 17, as I said. She was born in July of 1982, so she was due to turn 18 in a couple of weeks' time. Regina was one of two children. She had a younger sister named Margaret, who was born in May of 1984, so she was just under 2 years younger than Regina. She was around 15, 16 at the time that this case took place. And the two sisters were raised by their mum, Nora. As I understand it, they didn't really have anything to do with their father. He was actually in prison for burglary and robbery related offences. The family of three lived in an area called Pilsen in Chicago, which was not the safest area, to be honest. I think at the time there was a lot of crime going on there, a lot of gang activity, etc. So Nora didn't really like living there with her daughters because she only ever wanted the best for her girls. As they grew older, Regina and Margaret were just your typical young girls. They loved animals, specifically horses. They loved horse riding. They loved performing, so singing and dancing and acting, and they were very close as sisters. They seemed to have a very close bond. I think Margaret, being the younger of the two, naturally kind of aspired to be like her big sister Regina. She thought so highly of her, and she always wanted to be doing what Regina was doing. Both girls seemed to do very well in school. They were both honor roll students, so they achieved high grades. They were very smart and well behaved. However, this seemed to change dramatically for both of them when they were in high school, because it was then when the sisters started to hang around with the wrong crowd. As I said, there was a lot of gang activity in Pilsen where they lived, and the girls unfortunately succumbed to these gangs. They started to rebel and they joined these groups, these gangs. They would go out drinking with them. They started doing drugs and getting involved in committing crime, and their mother Nora didn't know what to do. She tried to stop her daughters from going down this path, but the girls didn't listen. And I think it got to a point where Nora just felt powerless to stop them. It would have been hard enough for her to try and stop just one of them from going down this road, but two of them, it would have been virtually impossible. Nora was outnumbered. The girls could just gang up on her. In the spring of the year 2000, Regina Defrancisco was actually in and out of court a lot because earlier that year she had been arrested and charged for drug and narcotic related offences. Basically, one day she was alone in her boyfriend's apartment. Her boyfriend was named Johnny Rivera, who was a member of one of the local gangs. And whilst Regina was in his apartment, the police knocked on the door and they raided the place and they found a lot of cocaine in there. And because Regina was the only one in the apartment at the time, she was arrested and charged and she was going to have to go to court. And this sequence of events is actually what led to her meeting Oscar Velazquez. You see, in May of 2000, just the month before Oscar's death, Regina left the courthouse just as Oscar was driving down the road in his Camaro car, and he stopped at some traffic lights. states Regina spotted him and she approached his car and she asked Oscar if he could give her a lift home. Oscar said yes, and that is how they came to meet. And after they met, they started chatting more and more, and they quickly started seeing each other. Oscar really liked Regina. He was completely smitten with her. However, within a matter of weeks of meeting Regina Defrancisco, Oscar Velazquez would be dead. And as Regina was one of the last people that he spoke to on the phone on the night that he died, she became of interest to the police. They wanted to talk to her. If you remember, Oscar was supposed to meet his uncle that night at the gym, but he cancelled because he said that he suddenly had different plans. Could these other plans have been with Regina? Did Regina know anything about what happened to Oscar that night? And did she have anything to do with his abandoned, burnt out car? So Regina was approached by the police, and just 3 days after the murder, she was brought to the police station alongside her younger sister Margaret, because remember, Oscar's brother Marco saw 2 girls in Oscar's car the day after he was killed. The police theorized that maybe those 2 girls were Regina and Margaret Defrancisco, so they were both brought to the station to be interviewed. And during Regina's interview, she did actually admit that she spoke to and saw Oscar on the night of his death. She said that at around 8 p.m. on the 6th of June, Oscar came round to her house and they just had a short chat, and then he got back in his car and he left, and that was the last time that she saw him. Regina said that the last time she saw Oscar, he was alive. And when her younger sister Margaret was questioned, she said the exact same. She said that she was also at home that night. Oscar came round, but then he left soon after. They both had the same story. And so the girls were asked if they could think of anyone that might have wanted to do this to Oscar, may have wanted him dead, and Regina told the detectives that perhaps they should look into Johnny Rivera, her ex-boyfriend. As we know, Regina started seeing Oscar in the month before his death, so she thought that maybe Johnny might have been jealous. Maybe he wanted Regina back and he decided to get Oscar out of the picture by killing him. So it was following this when the police had their first suspect in the case, Johnny Rivera. Johnny was also interviewed by the detectives, and he basically said that he wasn't interested in Regina like that anymore. He didn't care about who she was seeing. So he said that he didn't have a motive. He had no reason to want Oscar Velazquez dead. So the police asked Johnny where he was and what he had been doing on the night that Oscar was killed. And I don't know exactly what he said, but he gave them some kind of alibi, and it turns out that he was telling the truth. They could confirm that his alibi was truthful and he wasn't involved in this murder, so he was eliminated from the homicide inquiry. And it was after he was eliminated when suspicion towards Regina Defrancisco grew quite a lot, because Johnny was not the killer, but it seemed as though Regina was almost trying to implicate him. She was trying to divert the police's attention to him. But why? Was it because she didn't want the police to look at her because maybe she was involved in this horrific crime? She knew more about this murder than she was letting on. So Regina Defrancisco and also her younger sister Margaret really started to become potential suspects in the case in the police's eyes. So as part of this line of inquiry, police officers decided to conduct door-to-door inquiries in the neighbourhood where the sisters lived with their mother Nora, because we know from Regina and Margaret's statements that Oscar went there. He went to their house on the night that he was killed. They claimed that when he left, he was alive, but maybe that was a lie. Maybe he was killed in their house and that's the last place he ever was before his death. So they wanted to speak to and take statements from everyone who lived nearby just to find out if they could remember anything suspicious that they'd seen or heard that night. And one neighbour in particular provided some very interesting information that seemed to be related to this case. This neighbour was named Maria Constantino, and she said that on the night of Oscar's murder, the 6th of June, June, she, I think, looked out of her window or something, and outside she saw 3 young girls carrying a very big heavy object and putting it into the boot or the trunk of a car. This car, she said, was a white Camaro, the exact same car that Oscar owned and that was later found abandoned. Maria even said that the girls were jumping on and kicking the car boot door because they were struggling to shut it. Maria told the police that 2 of these girls were Regina and Margaret Defrancisco. She obviously recognized them because they were her neighbors. However, she said that she didn't recognize the other girl that was with them. She didn't know who that was. So now, after receiving this statement, it was actually looking like 3 people were involved in this. Not just Regina and Margaret, there was a 3rd young girl, a 3rd suspect now. As hard as it was to believe because they were 3 young girls, all of the evidence seemed to indicate that they were the ones who did this. Oscar was killed by 3 teenagers. After learning all of this from the neighbor, the police got to work on trying to identify who this 3rd girl was, and also they managed to obtain a search warrant for the Defrancisco home. Obviously, the theory at this point was that that's where Oscar was killed, inside of that house, so the detectives wanted to search it to see if they could find any evidence which proved this. So that's exactly what they did. A week after Oscar was killed in mid-June of 2000, searches of the house began, and one of the very first things the police found was actually some bed linen which matched the bedding or the floral bed sheet that Oscar's body had been wrapped in. One source states that it was floral pillowcases that were found in the house, and they had the very same pattern as the bed sheet that Oscar was wrapped in, so they'd obviously come from the same bedding set. So that was the first big piece of evidence that they found, and they also discovered quite a lot of evidence in the basement of the house. They actually discovered traces of blood, very small droplets of blood leading down to the basement, going down the steps. But the actual basement itself seemed relatively clean. In fact, it looked as though someone had meticulously cleaned the area pretty recently. So this, paired with the fact that there were drops of blood leading down to the basement, indicated to the detectives that this was probably the room where the murder occurred. Oscar was shot in this basement, and this was pretty much confirmed when luminol tests were conducted. Remember, luminol is a chemical that is often used in these kind of criminal investigations because when you spray it over an area, it can show the police where blood has previously been but has been washed away. So they sprayed the room with luminol, and that revealed that there was a lot of blood all over the basement. Samples of the blood were collected and sent off for testing, and they later came back as a match to Oscar Velazquez. And in addition to the blood evidence, detectives also discovered a bullet shell casing in the basement, a .380 shell casing, which, if you recall, matches the .380 bullet that killed Oscar. So all of this evidence proved that yes, this was the place where Oscar was murdered. The police had solid evidence to prove that Regina and Margaret Defrancisco were the murderers. But again, were they the only ones responsible? The police obviously believed from the statement provided by the neighbor Maria that a third girl was involved in this, but they still needed to find out who that girl was. So they began looking into friends of the Defrancisco sisters, their acquaintances, to see if any of them matched the description of this third girl, and that was when they came across a 15-year-old named Veronica Garcia. Veronica was in similar circles as Regina and Margaret, and she was also involved in like gang activity. She had been involved in criminal activity, and she had been friends with the sisters for a long time now. She was more friendly with Margaret just because they were closer in age, so I think they could maybe relate to each other more, but she was friends with Regina too. So the police decided that they wanted to speak to Veronica Garcia, so she was brought down to the police station and she was interviewed. And she had her parents with her actually, because she was obviously only 15 years old. Veronica Veronica was asked a variety of questions regarding her relationship with the Defrancisco sisters, regarding Oscar Velazquez, what she knew about him, what she knew about his relationship with Regina, etc. And then Veronica was asked about that night, the night of the 6th of June 2000. She was asked what she could tell the police about what happened that evening. And at first, Veronica seemed pretty on edge. It was clear that she was very uncomfortable with the questions and she was kind of trying to avoid answering them. But then the detectives just said to her, look, we know that you know what happened that night and we need you to be honest and we need you to open up, because if you don't, you are just going to be charged with murder. And it was then when Veronica started to talk, and she actually said that the incidents that eventually led to Oscar's death began about 2 weeks before he was actually killed. Veronica claimed that a couple of weeks before this case took place, Margaret Defrancisco approached Oscar Velazquez, her sister's boyfriend, and she asked him if he could lend her $1,000. And Margaret said that she needed it to bail Regina out of jail. She said that Regina had been arrested and that she needed someone to pay her bail. And Oscar immediately said yes, he was obviously seeing Regina, he really, really liked her, so he wanted to help her out and he gave Margaret the money. What he didn't know, however, was that that was all a lie. Regina hadn't been arrested. Sources state that another boyfriend of hers had. It may have been Johnny Rivera or it may have been another guy. I'm not sure how many men she was seeing. But another boyfriend of Regina's had been arrested and she needed money to bail him out. So her and Margaret came up with this fake story. They pretended that Regina had been arrested because they knew that if they told Oscar that, he would give them the money because he was so smitten with Regina. And of course it worked. He gave them $1,000, but after a couple of days he got in touch with the sisters and he asked them if he could have his money back, but they didn't have the money to give back to him and they never had any intention of paying him back. So it's believed that they decided to get him off their backs about this money. They were just going to kill him. Now, different sources seem to say different things about this next part, so I'm not entirely sure what is accurate here. But some sources state that on the evening of the 6th of June 2000, the Defrancisco sisters lured Oscar to their house on the premise that he could basically have a threesome with them, with these two sisters. They told him that unfortunately they couldn't pay him back the money, they didn't have the money anymore, but they said that they would basically pay him in sex, and apparently Oscar agreed. Whereas other sources say, and a documentary that I watched about this case states that Oscar was just lured to the house that night by the sisters because they lied and said that they did have the money and they could pay him back. So they told him to stop by the house to pick it up. Whatever the circumstances, the sisters basically lured him to the house by lying to him. They had no intention of having sex with him or paying him back. They intended to kill him. And Veronica Garcia told the police that she was actually the one that supplied the sisters with the gun that was used to shoot Oscar. She claimed that she had gotten it off her boyfriend who was in a gang. So Veronica went to the Defrancisco home on the evening of the 6th of June. She gave them the gun that the sisters had asked for and they waited for Oscar to arrive. He eventually pulled up outside the house in his white Camaro car and Margaret let him into the house. Margaret then led Oscar down into the basement where Regina was waiting, and as he started walking down the steps, Margaret pulled out the gun, she aimed it at Oscar's head and she fired it. She shot him once in the back of the head and he died. He probably would have died instantly, although I did read on one article that either both of the sisters or just one of them actually kicked his head after he was shot just to make sure that he would die. And the sisters had actually laid out a tarpaulin sheet on the floor of the basement before the murder as well. They wanted to at least try and avoid getting blood on the floor. After Oscar was dead, they stole from him. They took his wallet, they took some money off of him, they took his silver chain necklace, etc. And then they wrapped up his body in the floral bedsheet and the tarpaulin, and then all three of them, Regina, Margaret and Veronica, carried his body and they put put it in the trunk of Oscar's car, and that's of course what the neighbor Maria saw. And obviously we know what happened after that. They drove his body to that alley where they set him on fire using aerosol cans and now varnish remover as an accelerant. And then shortly after this, the sisters must have set his car on fire too. Some reports state that initially they tried to sell the vehicle and get some money for it, but they were unable to, so instead they just burnt it. So that was Veronica's account of what happened that evening, and it is believed that Veronica had no knowledge of what the sisters planned to do that night. She told the police that the sisters asked her to get the gun because they wanted to carry out a robbery. They just wanted to rob Oscar. They never told her that they actually planned to use it to kill him. Veronica was not in on the plan. Some sources even state that Veronica wasn't even in the basement when Oscar was killed. She was upstairs in the house and she just heard the gunshot. And after he was dead, I imagine she just helped to clear up the scene and dispose of his body because she was terrified that if she didn't, and if she called the police, the sisters would turn the gun on her and murder her too. And the detectives did believe that Veronica was telling the truth about this. She genuinely had no idea what was going to go down that night. But after getting this account from Veronica and after collecting all of the evidence from the Defrancisco home, the police set out to arrest and charge the sisters with Oscar's murder. It was actually after the DNA test came back on the blood. Remember, samples of the blood in the basement were sent off for testing, and when they came back as a match to Oscar Velazquez, that was when the police felt as though they had enough solid proof to arrest these girls. However, by the time the police had obtained the arrest warrants in July of 2000, it appeared as though the sisters had fled. Officers went to their house to arrest them, but they were gone. Their mother Nora was there, but the girls were not. Clearly, they knew that the police were onto them. They knew that it was only a matter of time before detectives pieced this case together and would try to arrest them. So they decided to go on the run before they could do that. And as soon as the police realized this, the search instantly began for Regina and Margaret Defrancisco. The police were trying to track down all of their friends and acquaintances and gang associates to see if they were staying with any of them. Officers were visiting all of the different areas in Chicago where the girls were known to hang out frequently, hoping to find them. They were doing everything that they could to try and locate these girls, but they had no luck. There was absolutely no sign of the Defrancisco sisters. And by early 2001, more than half a year after Oscar's murder, there was still no sign of them in Chicago. So it was at this point that detectives started thinking that they had probably fled the city and were hiding out in another state, possibly. The police were getting very desperate at this point. I don't think they really knew where else to look, and so they decided to feature the case on the TV program America's Most Wanted. And during this program, they urged everyone in the US to keep an eye out for these girls, and if you see them, to get in contact with the police immediately. And following this, the police did receive countless tips and leads from the public. Of course, so many people saw that America's Most Wanted episode, so there were numerous potential reported sightings of the girls from all over the country, but unfortunately when the police looked into them, it turned out that they weren't the sisters. It was just other young girls that looked a little similar to them. The extensive search continued for Regina and Margaret all throughout 2001, but still there was no luck. And in March of 2002, the case was featured on America's Most Wanted once again. The same episode was aired a second time, and luckily this time it did provide the police with the breakthrough that they so desperately needed. After this episode went live in March, the younger of the two sisters, Margaret Defrancisco, who by this time would have been around 18 years old, coming up to 18 years old, she was recognized by someone in a village called Roscoe in Illinois, which is actually only about an hour and a half's drive away from Chicago, so she wasn't that far. So after they received this report, the Chicago PD got in touch with the police department in Roscoe and they tracked Margaret down and arrested her. She was arrested while she was hiding in an apartment. A couple of reports actually state that she was staying with relatives in Roscoe. Once she was apprehended, she was sent back to Chicago and she was interviewed by the police. And she was actually pretty angry with the detectives in this interview. She was angry about the America's Most Wanted episode. She had obviously seen it and she was annoyed that the actress who played her in the kind of reconstruction of the case didn't even look like her, she felt. But she was just mad about the America's Most Wanted episode in general. She didn't like the fact that the police had gone on there and told the whole country what the girls had done, because she claimed that it was all lies. Clearly, she was not willing to cooperate or tell the truth. When asked about her older sister Regina, Margaret said that she had no idea where she was. She claimed that she hadn't spoken to Regina in over a year by this point. She said that they went their separate ways and she hadn't seen or heard from her sister since. And so the hunt for Regina Defrancisco continued, and later that same year, in October of 2002, she was finally found. I believe it was the 18th of October 2002 in the city of Dallas in Texas, when police officers spotted a car driving through a red light. So obviously the officers tried to get the car to stop and pull over, but it didn't. In fact, the driver of this car started to drive really fast to escape the police. So the police chased after them and eventually the car actually crashed. I don't think it was like a massive crash. No one was hurt from what I can gather, but it crashed and the people in the car were arrested. And it turns out that the person driving this vehicle was 20-year-old Regina Defrancisco, who had been on the run for more than 2 years by this point. Finally, she had been found. She was hiding out in Texas. So after she was identified and apprehended, she was also sent back to Chicago, and I believe she, just like her younger sister Margaret, also refused to cooperate with the police. She would not confess to the killing. But regardless, the police had enough solid evidence to charge them with the crime, and so that's exactly what they did. Both the Defrancisco sisters were charged with murder. Because they refused to confess, that meant that a trial had to take place, and the girls were actually tried together. However, there were 2 separate juries in the courtroom. So I think one jury was to decide if Regina was guilty and the other was to decide whether or not Margaret was guilty. And during their trial, they pleaded not guilty to murder, but by reason of self-defense. They finally admitted that yes, they were responsible for Oscar Velazquez's death. However, they claimed that they only killed him because they were trying to defend themselves. They said that on the night of the murder, Oscar was really angry at Regina for some reason. Maybe he realized that the sisters had lied about Regina having been arrested and they lied about being able to pay him back his money or something. He was so angry at her that he wanted to kill her, and so he began attacking her, and that was when Margaret ran into the basement, raised the gun and shot him in the head. She said that she was just trying to save her sister. One source I read states that Regina claimed during the trial that Oscar himself was actually armed with a gun that night and that he pulled his gun out on her. He was about to shoot her, but before he could, Margaret shot him. But it is important to note that no gun belonging to Oscar was ever found, so it is likely that that was probably a lie. Oscar wasn't armed with a weapon. No one really believed the sister's story. Oscar was not a violent person and there was absolutely no evidence to back up their account. All of the evidence indicated that this was a cold-blooded, premeditated murder. This wasn't self-defense. Although, having said that, when it came to the end of their trial, only one of the Defrancisco sisters was actually convicted. Regina Defrancisco was found guilty of first-degree murder by accountability, but her younger sister Margaret, the one who actually fired the gun, the jury who were deciding her verdict couldn't actually come to an agreement on whether to find her guilty or not guilty. There were obviously 12 members on the jury, and 11 of these jury members believed that yes, she was responsible for this crime, but there was one woman on the jury that just could not see it. She basically refused to believe that a 15-year-old, which is obviously how old Margaret was at the time, she refused to believe that a 15-year-old girl could have done that, could have shot someone in the head. So she felt that she had to vote not guilty despite all of the evidence. And obviously, because she didn't agree with her fellow jury members, that meant that it resulted in a mistrial. So Margaret Defrancisco was going to have to be tried a second time. Her second trial took place just 4 months after the first one in November of 2004. Of course, there was a brand new jury and they were presented with all of the evidence that the police had collected. And once again, Margaret claimed that she only killed Oscar in self-defense. He was going to kill her sister, so she was just trying to protect her. However, this second jury saw through the lies, and at the end of the trial, she was also found guilty of the first-degree murder of 22-year-old Oscar Velazquez. So let's talk about their sentences. On the 9th of September 2004, Regina Defrancisco was sentenced to 35 years in prison for her part in the crime. And 3 months later, on the 14th of December 2004, Margaret Defrancisco was sentenced to 46 years in prison. She was given 11 years more than Regina because, as I said, she was the one that actually physically shot Oscar. According to sources, both of the sisters have tried to appeal their sentences over the years, I think a couple of times, but each time they have been rejected. The third girl involved, Veronica Garcia, was also ordered to serve some time in prison for her part. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it is believed that she didn't know what was going to happen that night. She had no idea that they lured Oscar there to murder him, but nevertheless, she did have to face some punishment for the fact that she helped the sisters cover up the crime. She helped carry his body to the car and dispose of him in the alleyway. And of course, she also supplied them with the murder weapon, the gun. So for all of this, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and she has obviously served that time now, and she is a free woman today, as far as I'm aware. But that is it for this case. That is the case of Oscar Velazquez. A really, really crazy roller coaster of a case. I can see why it was so hard for some people to wrap their heads around the fact that this crime was committed by teenage girls. Teenage girls who felt absolutely no guilt whatsoever. As I understand it, they never showed an ounce of remorse. The Defrancisco sisters didn't care that they had taken this young man's life. They didn't care about the hurt and the pain that they had caused Oscar's family. It's terrifying, it really is. As always, I want to hear what you guys think about this case, so do let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Also, feel free to let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. Again, you can let me know in the comments, or alternatively, I do have a case request form linked in the description box of all of my videos. Thank you so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Molly. Bye!